4 through to 15 stand part. I call the Honourable Member Grant Roberts.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair. And this is my first opportunity to participate in the committee stages of this debate. And we do come now to part 2 of this bill. And I do think it is actually worth noting that the discussion we were just having on part 1 often impacted on both the specific changes to working families, for families and for KiwiSaver. And because, Mr Chair, what I think as we begin the discussion of these changes in part 2 we need to do is look at the wider context in which they are set in this budget. Because essentially these are the big changes for the National Party. The big vision for the National Party in this budget is to cut working for families and to cut KiwiSaver. That's it. There's no big vision about growing the economy. There's no big vision about innovation in our economy. There's no attempt to say how we'll create the jobs that will keep New Zealanders in New Zealand rather than going to Australia. Instead, what we have in part 2 of this bill that we debate under urgency is to cut in to low and middle income earners' income. It's to take out income from 1.7 million KiwiSavers. That's what part 2 does. And because this budget has no vision and no plan, it's a defensive budget. My colleagues on this side of the House, Mr Chair, know that I'm a fan of sport. And for me, this budget, from the government's point of view, is all about the all-whites going out on the field to play a game of soccer and putting all of their players inside their own penalty area and having no one up front trying to score any goals. That's what this budget's about. It's a defensive budget with no vision. We heard about ambition for New Zealand a couple of years ago from John Key and Bill English, but instead, as I sat and listened to the budget speech yesterday, I kept waiting for the plan, waiting for the thing that they were going to do. Yes, there were going to be cuts. Yes, we were living in tight financial times, and then we would expect to hear the plan. But instead, the plan is the cuts. That's it. There's nothing else. There's no vision for the future. There is, as we see in part 2 here, simply cuts to working for families and for KiwiSaver. And the promise that the National Party delivered, and it's surprising that anyone would really believe promises that the National Party deliver any longer, having cut GST, increased GST when they said that they wouldn't. But on this, the promise was, pre-budget, working for families, we want to get at those people who are earning high income levels. We want to get at those people earning over $100,000 because they shouldn't be there. That's the kind of middle class welfare, this is what the National Party says, the kind of middle class welfare that we don't need. But the reality of the changes in part 2, Mr Chair, is that it kicks in for people earning as little as $36,000 a year. It kicks in for the security guards who work around this building and other places. The level of pay that they're getting, they're too rich to be supported. They're the people who don't deserve support for raising children. That's what this budget says. That's what part 2 says. This is not about high income earners. This is about people who are currently struggling to meet the cost of living, and they are being told, I'm sorry, you're the people who have to bear the burden of the financial problems facing New Zealand. It's middle income earners who have to bear that burden with the cuts to working for families. Because if we look at working for families, and one of the things that's frustrating, Mr Chair, for people on this side of the House is when working for families presented, it's presented as being about somebody who's on an income of $70,000. Let's be absolutely clear. This is about family income, household income. If a household has an income of $70,000, that can be 2 earners, each earning $35,000. $35,000 a year each. If you're raising 2 children in that environment, that is difficult at the moment. They are the people who are struggling to put healthy food on their table. They are the people who need support to ensure that those children get the kind of opportunities in life everyone in this House would want them to have. And in part 2 of this bill, working for families has been cut for those people. It has been cut so that opportunities are simply not there for those people in the future. But the problem is the whole budget, Mr Chair, is based upon fiction, figment. This notion that there'll be 170,000 jobs. From where? From where will those jobs come? There's not 170,000 jobs in rebuilding Christchurch. There are some jobs in there, but there are not 170,000 jobs. The Rugby World Cup gets a good play in the budget in terms of economic growth. Well, I hate to tell Mr Key and Mr English, but the Rugby World Cup finishes in October. It won't be there in the future. It won't be there to provide... Mr Chair.
I call the honourable member Grant Roberts.